The doctor slipped a folded paper quietly into my bag, his hand trembling as though the act itself was dangerous. Hours later, when I reached inside, my fingers brushed against it. I unfolded the page and saw the hurried words scrawled across it. Run from your family. My blood turned cold. My family? My own children? The warning felt impossible, unthinkable. And yet, that very night, I uncovered the truth. They were already planning to put me away in a nursing home, to steal everything I had built, every piece of dignity I still owned. But what they didn't know was that I carried a secret of my own, one powerful enough to change their lives forever. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I am 70 years old. It feels strange to say it out loud, to measure my life in numbers, but 70 carries a kind of weight you cannot ignore. It is the sound of your knees when you climb the stairs, the shadows of people you've buried, and the silence after decades of giving more love than you ever received in return. Yet it is also resilience, the stubborn will to keep standing even when life has tried to fold you in half. I raised 2 children. Daniel is my son by blood, born with a restless spirit and an appetite bigger than his discipline. He drifts in and out of my life like a storm, leaving behind requests for money, apologies half-formed, and promises that never hold. And then there is Claire, my daughter by choice. I brought her home when she was only 2 years old, wrapped in a blanket and trembling with the fear of abandonment. I promised her that night she would never be left alone again. I wanted her to believe in love, in belonging, in the safety of family. I never imagined that the very girl I swore to protect would one day become the sharpest edge against me. My home was once alive with warmth. I can still smell the cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, hear Daniel's loud laugh, and see Claire's small fingers curled around mine. But lately the air feels different. It is thick with questions, too many questions, about my will, my insurance, the property I've held on to since my husband passed. I notice the way Daniel hovers near my safe, as though trying to memorize the combination. I catch Claire writing things down when I talk about bills or doctor's appointments, her pen scratching against paper with a focus that feels colder than care. Little by little, I became less of a mother and more of a balance sheet. Their eyes no longer lingered on my face, but on the numbers they imagined behind me. It is a cruel kind of loneliness, sitting across the table from your children and realizing you are no longer someone they love, but someone they intend to manage, control, and, if necessary, erase. The doctor must have seen it before I allowed myself to. He looked at me too long, his brow furrowed, his words cautious. And when he slipped that paper into my bag, he was giving me what I could not yet give myself, permission to see the danger I lived in. That night, I could not sleep. The note sat on my nightstand, its ink burning into the dark like a wound that refused to close. Somewhere in the house, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. For the first time, I wondered if those steps belonged to my children, or to strangers my children had already let in. I curled the blanket tighter around me, my breath shallow, my heart racing, as though the walls themselves were closing in. I thought of my husband, gone for more than a decade now. He had trusted me to protect what he left behind, not just the money, but the values we tried to raise our children with. What would he think of this? That our son and our adopted daughter, who once clung to me with arms so small and desperate, would now stand together in the shadows, plotting to take everything away? I wanted to scream, to storm into their rooms and demand the truth. But fear held me still, and beneath that fear was something sharper, a seed of rage. I am 70 years old, but I am not helpless. And if they thought I was too weak to fight back, then they had forgotten the woman who carried them, fed them, and sacrificed for them. The night stretched long, each hour slicing me open with dread. Yet beneath it all, a question pulsed like a drumbeat. If the doctor was right, if my family was truly preparing to erase me, could I gather the courage to erase them first, from my trust, from my will, from my heart? Before I share what happened when I finally faced them, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave me a comment below, give this story a like, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Claire was never a stranger to my arms. I can still remember the first night I brought her home. She was only 2 years old, her eyes wide, her lips trembling as if the world had already betrayed her. I tucked her into a blanket, whispering that she was safe now, that I would never let her go. She looked at me with such hunger for love that I felt my heart split open. I thought, this child is mine, no matter what blood says. For many years she clung to me like a vine reaching toward light. She called me Mommy in a voice so soft it could melt stone. Every scraped knee, every nightmare, every school recital, I was there, her anchor. People often told me how lucky she was to be adopted, but the truth is, I was the lucky one. Claire gave me a second chance to love after Daniel, my firstborn, had grown distant and restless. She was the laughter in the house when he was gone. But as children grow, love doesn't always stay pure. Claire's smile began to sharpen. In her teenage years, she carried questions about her real parents that I couldn't answer. Each time she asked, "Why didn't they want me?" And I said, "They didn't deserve you." I saw her eyes harden, as though my love wasn't enough to patch the hole. Resentment crept in slowly, the way mold spreads unnoticed in the corners of a home. By her 20s, she had mastered charm like an art. To the outside world, she was the perfect daughter, attentive, responsible, always checking on her aging mother. Neighbors praised her, saying how blessed I was. And in small ways, I believed it too. She knew how to make a room look like devotion. But behind closed doors, I began to notice the tilt of her questions. "Mom, how much is the house worth now? Have you updated your insurance policy? Why not put me down as your power of attorney? It would just make things easier." She would smile as she said it, serving me tea, stroking my hand, like every suggestion was care. But underneath, I could feel the weight of control. She wanted to own my choices, to own me. I told myself it was just her way of worrying, that she feared losing me. But then the small humiliations began. She would correct me in front of others, telling neighbors I forgot things, hinting that my memory was failing. She'd scold me for cooking too much, for walking too little, as if I were a child needing discipline. It was a subtle cage, one bar at a time. The night I found the doctor's note, Claire's voice echoed in my mind. "Mother, soon you won't have to handle any of this. We'll take care of it all." To anyone else, those words might sound loving. But I knew better. Her eyes didn't hold affection that night. They held calculation, the way a predator watches its prey. It is a strange kind of heartbreak to realize the daughter you rescued from abandonment now schemes to abandon you in a worse way. I gave her my name, my home, my love without limits. And now, in return, she plots to strip me of dignity, to put me in a place where old women are left to rot quietly while their families take everything they ever owned. Still, I hesitate when I think of her. Part of me remembers that small girl with trembling lips clinging to me in the night. That part whispers that maybe, just maybe, she can't help it, that wounds from childhood never healed. But another part, the sharper, wiser part, knows this: pain does not excuse cruelty, and no scar gives you the right to destroy the hand that once held you. That is the Claire I must now face. Not the daughter I raised, but the woman who wears her face, who waits for me to falter so she can seize what she believes is hers. And the worst part? She does not scheme alone. Daniel's shadow looms behind hers, and together they have turned the word family into something dangerous. Daniel has always been a storm, loud when he enters, destructive when he leaves. My firstborn, my only son by blood, came into this world screaming, and in some ways he never stopped. I had such hopes for him. As a boy, he was bright, full of questions, quick to laugh. But somewhere between youth and manhood, something in him soured. Responsibility was too heavy, discipline felt like a cage. He wanted freedom without the price of earning it, and that desire clung to him like smoke. For years, he drifted from job to job, woman to woman, city to city. He would vanish without a word, then return with a grin and an empty wallet. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom," he'd say, reaching for my purse. And I, foolish or loving, perhaps both, would hand him what I could. Every dollar was meant to buy not only his groceries or rent, but also a sliver of closeness, a fleeting sense that he still needed me. But love bought with money is a fragile thing. It never lasts. By the time Daniel turned 40, he had nothing steady to show for it. No career, no family, only a trail of unpaid bills and broken promises. His visits grew colder. He no longer came for hugs or home-cooked meals. He came for checks. He asked about life insurance policies, about the title of the house, about accounts I thought no one remembered. When I brushed him off, he would sulk like a child, but beneath the sulk, I could see the steel of resentment. It was after my husband died that Daniel began circling more aggressively. The funeral flowers had not yet wilted when he asked, "So, Mom, what happens to Dad's savings?" I stared at him, unable to recognize the boy I once cradled. That day, something in me cracked. I realized I was not a mother in his eyes anymore. I was a vault waiting to be emptied. The cruelest irony is that Claire, my adopted daughter, once despised Daniel. She called him selfish, reckless, a leech. They fought constantly, Claire accusing him of wasting opportunities, Daniel mocking her as a charity case. For years, they could hardly stand in the same room without tension. But money has a strange power. Greed can turn enemies into allies. When Daniel began visiting more often, I noticed how quickly his arguments with Claire softened. I'd walk into a room and find them speaking in low tones, their words halting when they saw me. Once I caught Daniel slipping a folded paper into her hand. She looked at it, then looked at me, and her smile tightened like a lock snapping shut. My heart knew before my mind accepted it. The two of them, once divided, had found common cause. And that cause was me. I remember one evening in particular. We were sitting at the dinner table, the silence heavy, when Daniel casually asked, "Mom, don't you think it would be safer if you moved into assisted living? Less stress, more care." Claire nodded, adding, "It would free you from responsibility, Mother. You wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore." The way they looked at me then, it wasn't love, it wasn't concern, it was calculation. They weren't imagining my comfort. They were imagining my absence. That night, I cried in the privacy of my room, the note from the doctor hidden under my pillow. Run from your family. His warning was no longer a mystery. It was a mirror showing me what I refused to see, that Daniel and Claire, blood and bond alike, were planning to erase me. And yet, as broken as I felt, something inside me began to harden. If they thought age had made me weak, they were wrong. 70 years may have left me with aching bones, but it also left me with wisdom, patience, and the ability to fight in ways they could not predict. Daniel had returned not as a son, but as a wolf. And soon I would have to decide whether I would let myself be devoured or whether I would bare my own teeth. It is strange how a house can betray you. Mine once felt like a sanctuary, the place where I baked cookies, where the scent of cinnamon clung to curtains, where Claire practiced piano and Daniel sprawled on the couch with comic books. Now, every room feels like a stage set for my undoing. The first time I realized my home was no longer safe, it wasn't because of shouting or violence. It was because of silence. Silence so thick it pressed on my chest. Claire and Daniel would lower their voices whenever I entered the kitchen, their conversations halting as if they'd been caught in something shameful. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the silence grew heavier, and soon even the walls seemed to listen. One evening, I walked into the living room and found papers spread across the coffee table. Legal-looking documents, though they were quickly shuffled away when they saw me. Claire smiled too wide, saying it was nothing important. Daniel changed the subject so fast it was like slamming a door in my face. But I noticed the pen in Claire's hand, the faint indentation of my own name written over and over on a page beneath. Another time, I opened the refrigerator late at night and found my medication bottles moved from their usual place. When I asked about it, Claire insisted she had just been organizing. Yet I remembered the way she held the pill bottle, too long, too carefully, like she was memorizing the label. I began locking my bedroom door at night, something I had never done before in my own home. Still, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made sleep impossible. Sometimes they stopped outside my door, a pause that lasted too long, as though someone was listening for breath on the other side. Fear began to shape my routines. I stopped leaving my purse in the kitchen. I carried my keys in my pocket even when I was inside. The note from the doctor never left my nightstand, and sometimes I pressed it to my chest just to remind myself I wasn't imagining things. Someone else had seen the danger. Someone else believed me. It is a cruel feeling to realize the walls you paid for, painted, decorated with family portraits, can become a prison. Worse still, the jailers are the very people you once tucked into bed at night. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, I overheard them upstairs. Their voices carried through the vent, muffled but sharp enough to pierce. Claire said, "If we move her out, we can list the house before the end of summer." Daniel replied, "She won't fight it. She's too tired." My hands froze on a towel, my heart hammering so loud I thought they might hear it. That was the moment I knew. They weren't waiting for me to fade. They were preparing to push. I wanted to scream, to storm up the stairs and confront them, but I stayed still, every muscle trembling, because I knew if I showed my cards too soon, they would tighten their grip. Instead, I finished folding the laundry with shaking hands, carrying the weight of their betrayal like an iron anchor. That night, I walked through each room, memorizing the way the light fell on the walls, the photos that smiled from their frames, the echoes of laughter that lived only in memory. My home was still beautiful, but it was no longer mine. It had become theirs, claimed not with love, but with greed. I whispered to myself, "You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not theirs to control." But the words tasted hollow, because deep down, I wondered how long I could keep pretending this house was still my home. It begins small. Abuse does not always arrive with bruises or shouting. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in sighs, in the little ways someone chips at your dignity until you start doubting your own worth. That is how it was with Claire and Daniel, an erosion, not an explosion. I remember one morning I set the table for breakfast, just as I had done for decades. Plates aligned, coffee brewing, sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter. Daniel walked in, glanced at the spread, and muttered, "You shouldn't eat all that bread at your age." He slid the toast aside as though I were a child needing supervision. Claire chimed in with a sweet smile. "He's only worried about your health, Mother. Maybe we should just handle the meals from now on." My hands trembled on the coffee pot. They were no longer guests in my home. They were guards. Another time, I wanted to go to the market alone. Just a simple walk to the corner store, something I had done thousands of times. Claire blocked me at the door. "What if you forget your way back? What if you fall? Let me do it for you." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes told me the truth. She didn't want me out of her sight, not because she cared, but because freedom meant I still had choices. They started managing my pills, counting them, handing them to me as though I couldn't be trusted with my own body. They hid my checkbook under the pretense of keeping it safe. Even my phone calls grew monitored. Daniel once asked casually, "Who was that on the line?" But the way his gaze lingered made me feel like a prisoner reporting to a warden. The worst was how they spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. "She forgets things all the time," Claire told a neighbor, her voice full of false concern. "She's not herself anymore," Daniel added, shaking his head. Each word carved me down, painting me as frail, unreliable, a burden. Abuse without violence, but abuse all the same, silent, suffocating, disguised as care. It is a peculiar kind of pain to watch your own children rehearse your obituary while you're still alive. They treated me not as a woman who had raised them, but as a liability to be managed. A mother reduced to a balance sheet, a life summed up in property value and insurance policies. One evening, after another round of their careful corrections and sighs, I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door and stared into the mirror. The face looking back at me was tired, lined with age, but not weak. I pressed both palms to the sink and whispered, You are not crazy. You see what is happening. You must not let them erase you. The note from the doctor echoed in my memory. Run from your family. That night, I tucked the paper under my pillow. For the first time, I began to imagine leaving, not just the house, but the life I had built, the family I had poured myself into. It felt impossible, yet somehow, staying felt more dangerous. Money has a way of changing conversations. At first, it was subtle. Daniel asking if the mortgage was fully paid, Claire wondering aloud how much the house might sell for in today's market. I tried to laugh it off, answering vaguely, but their eyes sharpened each time. They weren't curious. They were calculating. I began to notice how often the subject of security came up. Claire would say, "Mother, you've worked so hard your whole life. Don't you think you deserve to rest now? Let us handle the finances." Daniel added his own twist. "It's risky for you to keep control of everything. One mistake and you could lose it all. Better to transfer things over to us while you still can." Their words wrapped themselves in false concern, but underneath, I heard the hunger. The inheritance, my house, the savings my husband left behind, even the life insurance he'd carefully arranged, had become the ghost in every room. I could almost see it, hovering behind their eyes. When they looked at me, they didn't see wrinkles or gray hair. They saw dollar signs. One afternoon, I found them in the dining room, papers spread across the table. Daniel quickly flipped one sheet over when I entered, but not before I caught a glimpse of my own name printed at the top. Claire smiled too brightly. "We're just helping you organize, Mother." My hands tingled with unease. Helping me organize? Or planning to erase me from my own life? Another time, Daniel came back from a phone call smirking. "A realtor says your property could sell fast, Mom. Big profit." He said it like good news, like he was already spending money that wasn't his. Claire nodded eagerly, her eyes shining in a way that made my stomach twist. The final straw came when I overheard them in the kitchen one night. Daniel's voice was low but sharp. "Once she's in a home, we can split everything clean. She won't be able to fight us." Claire replied, "Don't rush. If she signs while she's still lucid, it looks legitimate. We need patience." I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath shallow, the note from the doctor echoing in my mind. Run from your family. He had known. He had seen the trap tightening around me. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. I had sacrificed so much for them. Late nights, endless work, silent tears. I had given Daniel chance after chance. I had given Claire the very gift of belonging, of family. And this was my repayment, to be discarded like furniture while they picked over the bones of my life. I went to bed that night with a rage I hadn't felt in years burning through me. They thought I was too old, too tired, too fragile to resist. They were wrong. I had survived loss, poverty, loneliness, and heartbreak. And I would survive this too. But first, I needed a plan. It was Claire who perfected the art of sugar-coated cruelty. She knew how to lace poison with honey, how to turn control into something that sounded like care. One morning, I mentioned wanting to sort through some old photographs. She smiled and said, "Don't worry about that, Mother. I'll take care of them for you." Her hand brushed mine as if in comfort, but when I checked the drawer later, half the albums were missing. When I asked, she said lightly, "I put them away where they'll be safe." Safe from me? The photos of my own life? Daniel's methods were cruder. He barked, sulked, slammed doors. But Claire, she wielded manipulation like a scalpel. "We're just worried about you," she'd say, while removing my checkbook from the counter. "We only want what's best," she'd murmur, while calling my doctor behind my back to question my memory. The most humiliating moment came at the pharmacy. I reached for my wallet, only for Claire to stop me, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "No, Mother, let me handle this. You always get confused with money." My cheeks burned as the cashier glanced at me with pity. I wanted to scream that I wasn't confused, that I was perfectly capable. But I stayed silent, swallowing the sting. It wasn't just the control over things, it was the erosion of who I was. They corrected my stories at the dinner table, as though my memories couldn't be trusted. They finished my sentences in front of neighbors, painting me as fragile, forgetful. Each small cut left me bleeding invisibly. Abuse without bruises, and yet the more they tried to box me in, the sharper my awareness grew. I saw the pattern clearly. Every tender phrase was a chain, every offer of help, a lock. They wanted me to depend on them so completely that by the time they forced me into that nursing home, no one would question it. It would look like love. One evening, as Claire brewed tea, she placed a cup before me and said, "Drink, Mother. You need to keep your strength." The smell was different, bitter, not the chamomile I usually drank. I didn't touch it. She noticed, and her smile tightened. For the first time, I saw her mask slip, if only for a second. That was when I made a vow to myself. They would not break me. They could steal papers, speak lies, even strip my home bare. But they would not steal my dignity. I lay in bed that night, the note from the doctor pressed against my chest. Run from your family. Yes, but not just run. I would outthink them. I would gather proof. I would show the world who they really were. It was the past that gave me my first map out of despair. One night, after Claire and Daniel had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, the lights off, letting only the moon spill across the floor. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I began to drift back to a memory I had buried for decades. The day I swore I would never repeat my parents' mistakes. I grew up in a small, cramped apartment with parents who saw children as burdens, not blessings. My father disappeared before I could walk. My mother worked nights and came home sour with exhaustion. When I cried, she would snap, "Be quiet, you're too much." I learned early to make myself small, to survive by reading moods, by disappearing. That history lived in me the day I saw Claire for the first time. She was sitting in a hard chair at the adoption agency, clutching a stuffed bear so worn it looked like a rag. Her eyes were huge, hollowed out by abandonment. She didn't cry. She didn't look at anyone. Something in me broke open. I walked over, knelt down, and whispered, "You don't have to be alone anymore." That was the moment I decided to fight her battles with her. I raised her believing love could heal everything. But as I sat there in the moonlight decades later, with the doctor's note hidden in my pocket, I realized I had been wrong. Love does not erase old scars. Sometimes it feeds them. Sometimes it builds a hunger for control. That night, I opened the bottom drawer of the credenza where I kept my husband's old letters. I found one he had written to me before he died, words I had not read in years. Protect what we built. Protect yourself. He had left me the house, the savings, and something else. An account in my name only, one no one knew existed. Back then, I thought it was unnecessary secrecy. Now, it felt like a lifeline. I thought of Claire's face as a child, then her eyes at dinner the other night, calculating. I thought of Daniel's hand flipping papers, his voice low and conspiratorial. The contrast made my chest ache. How had we come here, to this place where my past, my own vows, my own compassion, was now the very weapon being used against me? But remembering my past also sparked something else. Survival. I had escaped worse. I had survived loneliness, poverty, humiliation. I could survive this. I could outthink them. I took out a notebook from the drawer and began writing. Dates, times, odd behaviors, things they said, numbers of phone calls. I would build a record. I would gather proof before they had the chance to paint me as senile. When I finally went to bed, my heart still ached, but my spine felt straighter. The note from the doctor wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a plan. Run from your family, yes. But first, gather your strength. Gather your weapons. I pressed the notebook under my pillow, next to the folded paper. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, "You survived before. You'll survive again." It happened in the most ordinary way. I was walking down the hall, arms full of folded laundry, when their voices drifted from the living room. I paused just outside the doorway, the fabric pressing against my chest, my heart already tightening. Claire's voice was sharp but measured, the way she always spoke when she was planning. If we move quickly, we can get her signature without raising suspicion. Once she's in a facility, no one will question it. Everyone will think it's for her own good. Daniel's reply was harsher, impatient. I don't care about appearances. I just want this house on the market. Do you know what a property like this could bring in? She doesn't even need it anymore. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I clutched the towels tighter, praying the sound of my heartbeat wouldn't betray me. The doctor's note burned in my mind. Run from your family. Claire sighed. Patience, Daniel. If we push too hard, she might resist. We'll tell her it's for her health, that it's safer. Once the papers are signed, everything will be in our hands. A chair scraped across the floor. Daniel muttered, You always were the smart one. Fine. But if she changes her will before then... His voice dropped lower, but I caught the edge of it. Then we'll make sure she can't. The towels slid from my arms onto the carpet, but neither of them noticed. My knees trembled, my throat constricted. The people I had given everything to, my son, my adopted daughter, were not waiting for me to die. They were preparing to erase me while I still breathed. I staggered back down the hall, pressing a hand to the wall for balance. The silence of the house mocked me. The same walls that had once held birthday balloons and Christmas lights now sheltering betrayal. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to demand why my love was never enough. But the words died in my throat. Instead, I fled to my room and locked the door. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, shaken, but not broken. I pressed my palm to the glass, whispering to myself, You are not crazy. You are not weak. You know what you heard. I slipped the doctor's note from my nightstand and held it close. My children were plotting my disappearance, but they had underestimated me. They thought age made me blind, that love made me defenseless. But they had forgotten. I had survived before. And now, I would survive them. That night, I began to imagine what it would take not only to run, but to fight. I started moving through the house like a ghost, my senses sharpened to every sound. At night, when the floorboards creaked above me, I would lie still, breathing shallow, memorizing footsteps. During the day, I listened from behind half-closed doors. The walls that once echoed with family chatter now carried whispers that sliced me open. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, I stopped outside the study. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Claire's voice was low but urgent. If she hesitates, we'll tell the doctor she's confused. We already have her medical records. All we need is the power of attorney. Daniel grunted. I'm sick of waiting. The realtor is calling me every day. Once the house is listed, we're set. I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't only planning to take my freedom, they were using my own doctor's files to build a case against me. That's why he had slipped the note into my bag. He must have seen what they were trying to do and knew I wouldn't believe it without warning. A gust of laughter from Daniel followed, mean and careless. She won't fight. She can't. She still thinks we love her. I pressed my back to the wall, heart hammering. They were preparing a story where I was the villain of my own life, an old woman losing her mind, needing protection. And once that story was told enough times, people would believe it. Paperwork would be signed. My voice would be gone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the note and my new journal spread before me. I wrote everything down. Their words, the date, the time, the sound of Daniel's laugh. Each detail was a brick in the wall I was building, not to keep them out, but to protect myself when the storm hit. I thought about my husband's hidden account, about the papers locked away in a box under the bed. They didn't know about those things. They thought I was helpless. They thought they were the only ones scheming. I poured myself a cup of tea, watching the steam curl. My hands still trembled, but my mind felt steadier than it had in weeks. Yes, I was afraid. But beneath the fear was something else. Resolve. If they wanted a story of me as weak and senile, I would write my own story instead. And mine would end with me standing, not erased. That night, the walls themselves seemed to breathe. I lay in bed, the lamp off, listening. The floorboards creaked again, slow, deliberate steps just outside my door. My hand slid beneath my pillow, finding the folded note from the doctor like a talisman. Run from your family. The sound of whispering drifted up from the living room. I slipped out of bed, bare feet on the cold wood, and moved toward the stairs. My heart pounded so hard it seemed louder than the murmurs below. At the landing, I crouched, straining to hear. Daniel's voice rose first, impatient. "She's still got those bank statements hidden somewhere. We need them before the lawyer gets involved." Claire's reply was calmer, like silk hiding a blade. "Don't rush. We'll tell her she's losing track of things. We'll move her into the facility, and once she's settled, it's all ours." Facility. The word made my stomach lurch. Not home, not care. Facility. A third voice surprised me, someone on speakerphone. "I can have the paperwork ready within a week," the stranger said, "but she must sign while competent." I leaned closer, the stair railing digging into my palm. So it wasn't just them. Someone else was helping them, maybe a lawyer or a realtor. My children weren't just plotting, they were executing. Claire laughed softly, a sound I had once loved. "She thinks we're protecting her. That's the beauty of it. No one will question anything." I pressed my back to the wall, closing my eyes. The betrayal burned hotter than fear now. My children, my blood and my bond, conspiring with strangers to erase me from my own life. I crept back to my room and locked the door, my body trembling. On the nightstand lay my husband's old keys, the box of documents he had hidden from everyone. My fingers hovered over them. For years I had wondered if keeping his secrets was paranoia. Tonight, I understood. He had been protecting me even after death. I opened the box and pulled out the folder marked private. Inside were bank records, property deeds, and a letter addressed to me in his handwriting. "Margaret, if anything happens, trust no one but yourself. Keep these safe." Tears blurred the ink, but I held the papers like a weapon. Below, footsteps moved again, slow and heavy. I pressed my palm to the documents and whispered, "You wanted a weak-old woman. You're going to meet someone else." From that night on, survival became a secret game. Every move I made had to look ordinary, yet every gesture carried intent. When Claire handed me my pills, I smiled and tucked them under my tongue, then later spat them into a tissue I flushed down the toilet. If Daniel asked for my checkbook, I pretended to search helplessly, knowing full well I had already hidden it behind the lining of an old suitcase in the attic. I started carrying my husband's documents in a worn knitting bag, the kind no one would bother to touch. To them, it was full of yarn and needles. To me, it was armor. The hardest part was pretending I believed their lies, pretending I trusted their care, pretending I was too tired to notice when they whispered in corners. It tore me apart to sit across the table, sipping tea Claire prepared, smiling as though I couldn't taste the bitterness of betrayal. I began writing down everything, dates, times, words, gestures. I hid the journal beneath the mattress, pages filling with evidence. Each entry made me feel less like a victim and more like a witness preparing to testify. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. The doctor had already risked himself to warn me. I needed someone else, someone outside this house of shadows. That's when I thought of Grace, my neighbor, a widow with kind eyes and a sharp memory. She had once been a school secretary, the sort of woman who noticed details others overlooked. One morning, while Claire ran errands, I slipped across the yard and knocked on Grace's door. When she opened it, the weight I carried spilled out of me before I could stop. My hands shook as I showed her the note. Her face grew pale. "Margaret," she whispered, "you can't stay in that house. Not without a plan." Grace offered me something I hadn't felt in months, an ally. She promised to keep a spare copy of my documents in her home. "If anything happens, at least someone will know the truth," she said firmly. That evening, as I stepped back into my house, I carried her words like a shield. For the first time, I realized I wasn't completely alone. My children thought they were closing in on me, but I was already laying down paths of escape. And as I lay in bed that night, the knitting bag at my side, the note under my pillow, and Grace's promise in my heart, I whispered into the dark, "You think I'm trapped. You have no idea. Every day after that felt like walking a tightrope. I had to move carefully, never letting Daniel or Claire sense what I was planning. They believed they were the hunters, circling me closer and closer. They didn't realize the prey had started mapping escape routes. I began to test small freedoms. I'd say I was going to the garden, then slip out the back gate for a few minutes, just to feel what it was like to breathe air without their eyes on me. Each time, my pulse hammered, afraid they would notice. But each time, I returned unnoticed. It gave me courage. The first real step came when I pulled an old suitcase from the closet. Not a large one, just enough to hold the essentials. Documents, a change of clothes, the family photos I couldn't bear to lose. I slid it beneath my bed, hidden beneath a quilt. Every time I walked past it, I reminded myself, you have a way out. Grace was my lifeline. On afternoons when Claire went shopping, I would cross into her house under the pretense of borrowing sugar or thread. Behind closed doors, I'd whisper updates, showing her the journal entries I had kept. She listened intently, her face tightening with anger. They won't get away with this, she told me more than once. But I knew listening wasn't enough. I needed something stronger, proof they could never deny. That's when Grace suggested I get a small recorder. She handed me a device that fit easily in my palm, telling me to leave it in the living room, the kitchen, anywhere they whispered. The first time I set it down, hidden beneath a stack of magazines, my hands trembled so badly I almost dropped it. But later, when I replayed the tape in my locked bedroom, my blood ran cold. Their voices were clear as bells, Daniel saying, "Once she signs the power of attorney, we'll sell within weeks." Claire replying, "She won't resist. She trusts us too much." I listened again and again, tears streaking my face. There it was, the betrayal made permanent, captured in their own voices. I wasn't imagining. I wasn't paranoid. The abuse wasn't silent anymore. That night, as I sat in the dark, the recorder clutched in my hand, I whispered to myself, "This is your weapon. This is your shield." The thought of leaving still terrified me. 70 years of living and loving had all been poured into that house, into those children. But sometimes survival means choosing yourself, even if it means abandoning everything you once built. And for the first time, I started to believe I could actually do it. Grace's kindness carried me through those weeks, but I knew I needed more than whispered comfort across the fence. I needed someone who could turn evidence into armor. That's when I remembered my husband's old friend, Mr. Harris, a lawyer who had attended our wedding and sent condolences when my husband died. He was older now, nearly retired, but his mind was sharp and his loyalty unshaken. I arranged a meeting under the guise of a doctor's appointment. Claire dropped me off at the clinic, never suspecting I had already spoken with Harris's assistant to pick me up from the side street. Sitting in his office, surrounded by the smell of old leather and dusted law books, I unfolded my notebook, the recorder, and the doctor's note. His face hardened as he listened. "Margaret," he said, his voice low but firm, "what they are doing is elder abuse. Fraud. Coercion. You're not powerless. You have the right to fight." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "But they're my children," I whispered. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "And you're their mother. That means something. But it doesn't excuse betrayal. If you don't protect yourself, they'll take everything and leave you with nothing, not even your dignity." The word dignity pierced me. I had been clinging to it like a thread. Hearing him say it gave me strength. Harris suggested I hire a private investigator to dig deeper, to collect the kind of proof that would hold in court. "It's one thing to record their voices," he explained. "It's another to show where the money is going, what lies they're weaving behind your back." Within a week, a man named Jack Reynolds entered my life. He was quiet, efficient, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without noticing. But his eyes missed nothing. He began checking bank statements, following Daniel's late-night escapades, tracing Claire's phone calls. What he uncovered left me shaking. Daniel was thousands of dollars in debt, owing money to people who didn't forgive easily. Claire, the picture of responsibility, had been funneling charges through credit cards in my name, purchases I had never made, expensive jewelry, weekend trips, Even medical bills, not her own. The proof stacked higher and higher. Pages of transactions, photos of meetings, recordings of phone calls. Harris and Jack worked together like hands on a clock, each tick pulling me closer to the truth. When I looked at the pile of evidence spread across Harris's desk, I felt two things at once: heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak, because my children's betrayal was no longer suspicion, but fact. Relief, because now I wasn't just a mother doubting shadows. I was a woman holding proof. That night, I returned home, the recorder tucked safely in my knitting bag, the secret heavy in my chest. Daniel and Claire were waiting at the table, smiles plastered on their faces, asking about my doctor's appointment. I smiled back, steady, careful. For the first time, I felt the balance of power shift, just slightly. They thought they were circling me tighter, but I was already building the trap that would catch them instead. The day of the confrontation began like any other. Claire brewed coffee in the kitchen, humming softly, while Daniel sat at the table scrolling through his phone. Sunlight poured through the window, making the room look warm and harmless. But my heart pounded like a drum. Inside my knitting bag lay the recorder, the documents, the bank statements, all the pieces of their betrayal lined up like bullets in a chamber. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for days. Harris had told me, "Keep your voice calm, don't give them room to twist it. Present the facts, not accusations." My hands still trembled, but my spine felt straighter than it had in months. I placed the bag on the table and sat down across from them. "I'd like to talk," I said. Claire's smile flickered. Daniel barely looked up. "I've been thinking about the future," I continued, my voice steady, "about my health, about my property." Their eyes sharpened. Daniel leaned forward. "We only want what's best for you, Mom." Claire nodded, her expression carefully neutral. I reached into the bag and pulled out a folder. "Good. Then you won't mind if I show you something." The first papers I laid down were the bank statements showing charges in my name that I hadn't made. Claire's face paled. Daniel's eyes darted to her, then back to me. "Where did you get those?" he demanded. "From someone who still believes in me," I said quietly. I pressed play on the recorder. Their own voices filled the kitchen. Daniel's impatient drawl, Claire's silky plans, the stranger's promise of paperwork. Each word played like a blade slicing the air. Claire stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. "You're spying on us?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" "Done for me?" My voice cracked, but did not break. "You were planning to erase me." Daniel's face twisted with fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're old. You're confused." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "I have evidence. I have witnesses. I have a lawyer, and I am not confused." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. Then Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do this." "Yes," I said softly. "I can, and I will." I gathered the papers and the recorder back into my bag, standing tall. In that moment, the kitchen no longer felt like their arena. It felt like mine. Their masks had shattered. What remained was raw, unmasked greed staring back at me. They had underestimated the woman who raised them. They had mistaken love for weakness. And now, for the first time, they were seeing the truth. The explosion came fast. Daniel's fist still rested on the table, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched tight. His eyes no longer held even the pretense of affection. "You've always been selfish," he spat. "All that money, all those properties, you think you earned them? Dad built that and you just sat back and waited for the benefits." The words sliced deeper than I expected. After all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the years of carrying him when he couldn't carry himself, he still saw me as nothing but a thief in my own life. Claire's voice cut in, sharper, colder. "Don't act like a victim, Mother. You're old. You can't manage these things anymore. You should be thanking us for taking responsibility." Her tone was steady, but her eyes burned. The child I once wrapped in blankets and kissed goodnight was gone. In her place stood a woman who spoke to me like I was a burden, an obstacle in the way of her comfort. I stood still, holding my knitting bag close to my side, letting their anger wash over me. For the first time, I didn't argue. I simply listened. Their words were the final confirmation of what I already knew. There was no love left in them, only hunger. Daniel's voice grew louder, the veins in his neck rising. If you think some cheap tape recorder and a couple of papers will save you, you're wrong. Nobody cares about old women who can't even keep their own family together. Something inside me shifted then. For months, I had been shrinking, letting them box me in, letting fear dictate every breath. But hearing my own son spit those words, hearing Claire echo his contempt, it lit a fire in me. Not rage, but clarity. I lifted my chin. You may not care, Daniel, but the law does. And so does the truth. You think I'm weak, but weakness doesn't gather proof. Weakness doesn't prepare. Weakness doesn't stand here facing two people who should have loved me and instead chose betrayal. Claire slammed her hand against the counter, her mask cracking. You ruined my life the day you adopted me. Do you understand? I was never yours, and you will never mean anything to me. Her confession was like glass shattering across the floor. For a second, silence followed. Daniel looked at her in shock, but I only felt something uncoil inside me. A strange, quiet strength. You've finally said it, I whispered, and I finally heard it. Now I know who you truly are. The room shook with their fury. Daniel pacing, Claire trembling with rage. But I felt steady, grounded. For months, fear had ruled me. In that moment, their anger became my proof, their cruelty, my liberation. They could scream, threaten, curse, but I was no longer theirs to control. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the walls still vibrating from their anger. Claire's words echoed in my mind like broken glass. I was never yours. I thought it might crush me. Instead, it clarified everything. Love, no matter how deep, could not bind those who refused to honor it. I knew then I had reached the line. The time for silence, for endurance, for waiting. It was over. If I stayed, they would tighten the net around me until I had no breath left. The only way to survive was to choose myself, even if it meant leaving behind the children I once thought were my world. I opened the suitcase I had packed weeks earlier. The documents, the journal, the recordings, a few clothes folded neatly inside. I added one last thing. The family photo we had taken on Daniel's 12th birthday. His smile wide, Claire's small hand clutching mine, my husband standing tall behind us. That moment had been real once, even if it no longer existed. I slipped the photo into the pocket as both a reminder and a farewell. The house was quiet, but I didn't trust the silence. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. My breath caught when I heard Daniel's door slam upstairs. I froze, my hand on the suitcase handle, but no one came down. Slowly, I pushed forward. At the front door, I hesitated. For decades, this house had been my fortress, the place where I poured all my love, all my labor. Walking away felt like cutting out a piece of myself. But another thought whispered louder, "This is no longer your home. It is their cage." I turned the knob with trembling hands, stepped out into the night air, and pulled the door shut behind me. Grace was waiting across the street, her porch light glowing like a beacon. She rushed forward, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, as if she could shield me from everything I had endured. "You're safe now," she whispered. Tears stung my eyes, but I straightened my back. "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." Behind me, the house loomed in darkness, a hollow shell of memories and betrayal. Ahead of me stretched uncertainty, fear, and the fragile taste of freedom. My heart ached, but it also beat with something fierce, courage I thought I had lost. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply. The night air felt cold, sharp, alive. I was no longer trapped. I had made my choice. The first night away from that house was the strangest of my life. Grace made up her guest room with fresh sheets and a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. I lay there staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Freedom should have felt like relief, But instead it pressed on me like a heavy weight. My body trembled with the aftershocks of fear, my mind spinning with questions. Would Daniel storm over, demanding where I had gone? Would Claire call the police, twisting the story to make me sound unstable? Or worse, would they pretend not to notice, as though my absence was simply another box checked off in their plan? But as the hours stretched, the silence held. No banging at the door, no ringing phone, just quiet. And slowly my breath began to even out. For the first time in months, I slept without locking my door. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Grace sat across from me at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug. "You need to decide your next step," she said gently. "Do you want to fight them in court? Or do you want to disappear quietly and start over?" Her words cut through me. Part of me longed to vanish, to take what little I had left and live somewhere far away where Daniel and Claire's shadows couldn't reach me. But another part burned hotter. Why should I be the one to disappear? Why should the woman who raised them, fed them, sacrificed everything, be forced into hiding while they walked free, pockets full of what was never theirs? I shook my head. No, they don't get to win. Not this time. Grace nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. That day, I called Harris, the lawyer. He was relieved to hear from me. "You did the right thing," he said. "Now we move forward. We have enough evidence to begin, but it won't be easy. They'll fight dirty." I thought of Daniel's twisted face, Claire's cold eyes, the venom in their words. I knew he was right, but I also knew I wasn't alone anymore. As the sun set, I sat by Grace's window, watching the light fade across the street. From there, I could still see my house, my roses unwatered, my curtains drawn shut. A part of me grieved for it, for the life that should have been peaceful, filled with grandchildren and laughter. Instead, it had become a battlefield. But inside me, a different garden was beginning to grow. Each breath of free air was a seed. Each step away from their control was a root. That night, as I laid my head down again in Grace's guest room, I whispered, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The weeks that followed were a strange blend of grief and determination. Some mornings I would wake up in Grace's guest room and feel a wave of guilt so heavy it almost pinned me to the bed. How could I take my own children to court? How could I turn my back on the people I had raised? But then I would remember the whispers, the forged documents, the plan to lock me away, and the guilt would turn into steel. Harris and Jack became my anchors. Jack delivered reports with quiet efficiency, screenshots of Claire's credit card fraud, bank withdrawals Daniel had hidden, even recordings of calls between them, and a realtor about liquidating assets. Harris organized everything into a case file thicker than a Bible. "We're ready," he told me one afternoon over tea at Grace's kitchen table. "It's not just hearsay anymore. It's evidence." I stared at the file. Inside were the voices of my children, their signatures on false papers, proof of every betrayal. It felt like holding a coffin of the life I had once known. Grace reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "They tried to erase you, Margaret. Now you're making sure the world sees them for what they are." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't want revenge," I said softly. "I want my dignity back." Harris smiled faintly. "That's exactly what we're going to do." Filing the case was like crossing a bridge I could never return from. Papers were signed, dates were set, and soon Daniel and Claire were served. The news spread through our small town faster than wildfire. Neighbors who had once admired my devoted children began to whisper a different story. People offered me quiet support at the grocery store, at church, even at the post office. I realized how many had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. Meanwhile, Claire tried calling me, leaving tearful messages about misunderstandings, about how she had only been trying to protect me. Daniel sent a single text, "You're making a mistake you'll regret." I didn't answer either of them. My lawyer did. Through it all, I rebuilt small rituals. I started walking each morning at dawn, feeling the sun on my face, my lungs filling with air untainted by fear. I cooked my own meals again, slowly, savoring the act. I began to feel like a person, not a prisoner. One evening, as I sat on Grace's porch watching the sky darken, I realized something. I had spent years being a mother, a wife, a caretaker. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten how to simply be Margaret. Now, in the quiet between court filings and strategy meetings, I was finding her again. It was a painful rebirth, but it was mine. The day of judgment felt heavier than any storm I had ever walked through. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and polished wood, the kind of place where truth either blooms or dies. I sat at the front, Grace at my side, Harris and Jack poised like guards. Across the aisle, Daniel and Claire avoided my eyes. They looked polished, rehearsed, Daniel in a suit that didn't fit quite right, Claire with her hair pinned back, her expression serene, as if she could convince the world she was still the devoted daughter. But when the tapes played, their masks cracked. The courtroom filled with their voices, Daniel's greed dripping from every word, Claire's calm instructions about how to make me sign while competent. The judge's face tightened. The jury shifted in their seats. Lies can be rehearsed, but truth has a weight you can't fake. Then came the investigator's report. Charges made in my name, debts unpaid, realtors contacted behind my back. One by one, the pieces stacked up until even their lawyers' arguments sagged under the weight. Claire's hands trembled on the table. Daniel's jaw clenched until his face turned red. When it was my turn, I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice did not waver. I am 70 years old. I may walk slower now. I may forget a name or two, but I am not senile. I am not confused. I am a mother who gave her life to these children, only to discover they plan to erase me. What you hear on those tapes is not love. It is greed. What you see in those papers is not protection. It is betrayal. The silence that followed was thick, almost holy. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. Fraud, forgery, abuse of an elder. Daniel and Claire were found guilty. Sentences were handed down, the gavel falling like thunder. As we left the courthouse, the sun was blinding. Grace squeezed my arm. Harris shook my hand. For the first time in years, I felt my spine straighten, not from anger or fear, but from freedom. That night, I returned to Grace's house, sat by the window, and watched the stars. My home was gone, my family broken, but I had something they could never steal back. My dignity, my courage, my voice. This was not the ending I once dreamed of, but it was an ending I chose. And in that choice, I found the beginning of something new. I stand before you now, not as a woman defeated, but as one reborn through fire. My story began with a note slipped quietly into my bag. 7 words that changed the course of my life. Run from your family. At first, those words felt like madness. How could a mother run from the children she raised, the same ones she sacrificed everything for? But life has a way of stripping away illusions, and mine were torn apart, one whisper, one forged signature, one betrayal at a time. When I uncovered their plan to erase me, I thought my world had ended. Yet what I learned is that endings can also be beginnings. Betrayal broke my heart, but it also sharpened my vision. I had spent years giving, pouring myself into others until there was nothing left. I had forgotten that my dignity was not a gift my children could grant or deny. It was mine, and mine alone to protect. Standing in court, listening to their voices betray them in front of strangers, I realized something powerful. Truth is not always loud, but it is steady. And steady truth will outlast the sharpest lie. My children's greed, their manipulation, their abuse disguised as care, all of it crumbled under the weight of evidence and courage. I will not pretend it was easy. It cost me tears I thought I had none left to give. It cost me the image of family I had clung to like a life raft. It even cost me the home I had built brick by brick. But what I gained was far greater: freedom, clarity, and the fierce knowledge that I am not weak. To anyone listening who has felt like a mother turned into a wallet, a caregiver turned into a burden, a human being reduced to property, I want you to hear me. You are not alone. Abuse is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent, soft, disguised as love. But even silent abuse can be fought. Even betrayal from your own blood does not define your worth. My secret, the one they never saw coming, was not just the hidden accounts or the documents my husband left me. My true secret was the strength I had carried all along. The strength to put an end to their control, to demand justice, to begin again. Today, I live in a smaller house with fewer things, but every corner belongs to me. My mornings are mine, my nights are quiet, and the air I breathe is free. And that, to me, is wealth greater than any inheritance. Now I want to turn to you. Have you ever had to find courage in the face of betrayal? Have you ever had to protect your dignity when others tried to strip it away? Tell me, where are you watching from? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice. If my story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and if you feel moved, use the super thanks to help me continue sharing these life stories. And if you want to go deeper, I invite you to watch the related videos linked at the end. See you in the next life story with love and respect.